Hi everyone, welcome to ArtsFest Online and to this evening's talk, 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends, with Wednesbury Poet Laureate, Brendan Hawthorne. Brendan will be sharing poems and chatting to R.M. Francis. Rob is writer and lecturer in creative and professional writing here at the University of Wolverhampton. If you have any questions for Brendan, please use the Q&A box and we'll go through them as we go along this evening. Just a quick reminder that the event is being recorded. It's a public platform, so please don't share any private information in the chat or Q&A. So with all that said, welcome both, and over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Claire, and thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. Welcome everyone. It gives me really great pleasure to welcome our guest for this evening, who is a local Black Country poet and legend of the Black Country poetry scene, frankly. He's the poet the Poet Laureate for Wednesbury, a widely published and award-winning poet, dramatist, singer-songwriter, amongst many other things. He's published several collections of poetry, of theatre, of local interest and local history, as well as walks and studies on the dialect of the region and other regions as well. He's a fascinating man, a fascinating poet, and we're here this evening celebrating this wonderful book, 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends, which is, well, I'll let Bren maybe discuss this a little bit further, but I'm sort of reading this as a kind of new and collected works. It's sort of the greatest hits of previous years and some new tracks thrown in to tantalize us further. And it's a really wonderful collection of poems that are sort of bookmarked in different sequences to tell different passages of Bren's life and to tell different kind of poetic and thematic preoccupations that have drawn him and inspired him along his poetic journey. So sit back and I hope everyone enjoys this evening. The way this is going to work is I'm going to introduce Bren first of all, and he's going to give us some of the poems from his latest book. And then we're going to have a bit of a chin wag about his poetics, about his practice, about his inspirations and all that good stuff. And then we'll close again with some more poems from Bren. And please, if anybody has any questions, then just drop them into the chat, and I'll pick them up as and when we go along, and you can post your own questions to this great man. So without further ado, let's get cracking with some poetry, everyone. And I'll welcome you to Brendan Hawthorne.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for listening in, viewing on this wonderful platform. Thank you very much for the introductions, everybody. And yes, there it is, the book. As Rob mentioned, it's in sections, and it is in sections of my life. So I'm going to start with the earliest collection that I had published in 2004. But before that, I want to give you a poem that I wrote about my childhood. I unfortunately had parents who didn't talk to each other very much, and being an only child led to a fair bit of isolation. So the poem I'm going to read to you is called Writing in the Sky, and it's all about the TV programs that we used to get as kids in the late 60s and 70s. And this is for Oliver Postgate, who did a lot of things called small films, and his characters were my friends, if you like, through childhood. So this is for Oliver Postgate, Writing in the Sky. He saw the small things scurrying around in other dimensions, parallel marvels with a story to tell. So he gave them a stage, a medium, a form that kept me warm under the sleepy blankets of my childhood, that flickered with coal fire shadows and black and white transmissions. I invested my youth in the Dragons Friendly Society before journeying out through space to small planets inhabited by hand-knitted aliens who whooped and simply cared for each other. I crashed through the waves on lungship sagas, imbibed moral strength and goodness, and ran through Pogle's Wood with Pippin and Tog, where we drank tea with plants under skies filled with dandelion heads and umbrellas. And now as my belly sags like an old cloth cat, I miss the man I never knew, the one who made my early years magic by keeping me on the rails with well-oiled tank engines and small films. And now in my old age, I'm left understanding the bravery of an artistic Red Cross man who walked out into the horrors of battle and brought back peace, security, and a sense of belonging to pass from generation to generation. And now he has left us with a legacy of brilliance that was born in a shed somewhere between Hendon and Broadstairs. So sleep, my old friend, while I weep for your loss, the loss of a man I never knew, who made my childhood complete with paper, wool and string, and the shelter of an outstretched metallic wing. So I'm just going to move into not only was the isolation of an only child with parents who didn't speak very much, but I also was brought up in a tower block where basically once you closed your door, that was it. And this is called high-rise living going up. It's hard to keep your feet on the ground when you're 4 years old and 7 floors up. Moved from a terrace in 65 on the grounds of overcrowding, that's what the council said. And they made me live with 67 other families in a high-rise paradise, which they deemed healthy for children and not overcrowded. From my window, I could see the other boys and girls playing on the tarmac with cracked skulls and broke bones with ease. I was lucky. I learned to ride a bike in my bedroom with a fitted carpet and 3/4 bed to break my fall. When the Tony Bell ice cream man chimed, the kids would run to him like Browning's Piper, dancing and cheering in the summer sun. By the time I got there, money, sweating in anticipation, the van would just be leaving. And as the others slurped through the mivies and the fabs, I got a smell of spent gas and an eyeful of dust. And then I had to make my own way back alone and empty-handed to ride in the lifts that broke down. And in my teens, I dodged the knives, the television sets, used nappies and last night's tea that plummeted from the upper floors, creating pavement art. And sometimes, sadly, it rained cats and dogs. The janitorial sterility was exchanged for filth. They stole your gas meters when you were out, and the hi-fi. Someone's architectural dream had become my nightmare. Though, through years of experience, I managed to catch the Tony Bell calf and return in triumph with a blue bubblegum screwball. And I'm just going to do this next poem is called Desert Rose. I was asked to write a poem about deserts, and the only desert I know is some of the urban landscapes that have been basically reduced to a type of desert. And this one was my first venture into being published in America. So hope you like it. Desert Rose. This desert molds dry riverbed pavements into serpentine sidewinders, grey as snakes, as cracked as bones. Between neon facades and fast food to-go oases, midnight fires blaze along flaring freeways in a grain of sand testimony to the speed of life and the epoch of existence. But this thin-skinned entity has no orange blossom to fragrance its breath, no will to temper the sulphurous twilight chiller winds that chase pollution plumes across jaundiced skies. Beneath the yellow stars of sodium enclosures, tumbleweed container spoils haunt empty parking bays, residue from throwaway takeaways and midnight copulations. Road sweepers gather their charge as solar strobe rapid pulse xenon beacons illuminate the doorway face of a man with the peel and smile of a salamander. Spits on the ground before ordering a set meal for one, just as a single rose falls from a forgotten table, left waiting in a wilderness where love lies deserted. And just to finish on with this first section, I'm going to do a poem from a collection that did to save the Greasy Spoon Cafe that was under threat a few years ago. And this is a collection that Jeff Stevens, who is a great friend of mine, we did a selection of poems together and put them together, and this was one of mine. It's called The Solon Saloon. Lipstick, gin and shandy cocktails are poured in front of the misted mirror for a specially chosen clientele, where spittoons rim-shot ring with extra strength ricochets and sawdust chokes the cockroaches during cucaracha step encores. Last round fights punch out the lights before cold damp streets swallow up the swagger. But the rush to the bar is slow, and paying is as distasteful as the thoughts of the last pole dancer of the evening when thinking of those who have publicly ground themselves into the apparatus before them. Under the flickering tar-coated flycatcher tubes that dimly illuminate the rattling skittle alley and the knocking domino stadia is where they gather. Those with puckered up, pumped up lips that suck down throwback whiskey chasers, making speaking uneasy in the snug and the smoke. The sandwich bell rings and pies and cobs let out a stale stench, as sour as old Tom's whiskers, and with just as much meat, as he sits in his overcoat, picking out the hairs from flake pork scratchings. Chewing on his gums, he congratulates himself on how some things will simply never change.
Wonderful stuff. That was awesome, Brendan. Thanks so much. And we'll hear some more of the wonderful words of Brendan Hawthorne to close the event as well. So, I mean, we've known each other for some time now, Bren. We've known each other from the local scene. We've worked together on lots of collaborations and you know, shared the stage a few times and shared the page a few times as well. But for those people that are not as familiar with your work and you, I wonder if you could just start today with a sort of brief kind of outline of how you first came to poetry and how you sort of made your way into the scene.
Yeah, poetry was always important to me as a child. One of the things I have is dyslexia, and this was caused or actually made worse by the fact that I was born left-handed and forced to become right-handed. So through school, basically everything was back to front, even my writing was back to front. And the fact is that certain types of dyslexia, you have, you can't transfer information from one page to another or remember things correctly. And this made me sort of focus on telling the best stories possible in the shortest amount of words. So it seemed as though poetry became the best vehicle for somebody with an imagination to actually tell their story as well. And I suppose going through secondary school, the angst-ridden teenager who then met the woman who was going to be his wife for the rest of his life, up to date so far, but seems as though it's going to continue. The importance of poetry was there as well. I sent Lynn, my wife, poetry when we were first going out together, and since 1979, that's been our lives together. So poetry was always important then, but sometimes life gets in the way, and you have to move forward and get a job that doesn't actually lend itself. So I worked in a factory for 18 years, and that sharpened my wit and my wits to a point where I felt I could go out and start writing and believing in what I did. And I was very fortunate. I used to send out work to small press magazines, which were excellent ways of sharing your work. And it was a publisher in Bristol who actually picked up my work and published me with my first collection under the Hobo Poets by Blue Chrome, and it was Urban Dawn, and that sold quite considerable amounts at the time. And since then, I've produced other poetry collections. I've written 2 plays, radio style plays, and some prose. And I'm working on other prose now and short stories. And I think it's always very important to maybe have a chosen genre, which is your favorite genre, but I think you also need to journey into other genres to actually then come back and appreciate, where your heart lies. And it's just led me along a wonderful path of ended up on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, spouting my work, getting my work up on the side of buildings in stainless steel panels, becoming a radio ambassador for Smooth Radio for 18 months, and right the way through to the last and latest publication, which is obviously 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends. I was also asked to write some local interest books by a publisher called Bradwell. So, these small hip pocket books, if you go around any local supermarkets, you may well find them on the shelves. And it all kicked off with a book on Black Country dialect and stories about the Black Country. And so I'm here tonight with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And like you say, 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends, which is a great title, by the way.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Where did that come from, out of interest?
The first poem that I really felt I'd got to grips with, which was in the first collection, Urban Dawn, was called 70s Child, and I shall finish on that. But the Other Fashion Trends, it sort of linked up. I was trying to find something that would go with it and something that would encapsulate the journey so far. And as you mentioned in the introduction, Rob, the fact is that it does contain sort of a best of. I've actually called it a best of and rest of for now, because I'm hoping to produce some other books. But I wanted people to be able to get copies of the favourites, the ones that have proven good at gigs, and the ones that people have sort of have aligned themselves towards. But I also wanted to put in there some new material as well. So it is in these sections, but it's almost like having sort of 4 mini books or 5 mini books within the same cover. And so people can take a chronological journey. These sections are in sequence. And so again, 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends. The cover was actually made up of photographs of me through various ages from the 1960s, because I was born in 1961, but I believe my childhood started in the 70s. So everything was all about growing up through the 1970s. And you look through your old photographs and you start to look at the fashion trends of the time and the writing trends of the time, what sort of things interested me, and what experiences could I write from. And so I suppose the other fashion trends were the different points in my life, from being not only just published in 2004 and the sort of the experience from then, but also the experience gathered throughout my life. Yeah,
I'm glad you closed that thought on the different kind of fashion trends in your own thought and fashion trends in the sources of inspiration that you drew from as well, because that's my next question actually, Bren. It's like we're one mind sometimes, isn't it?
I know.
So I mean, this is a book that spans sort of 20 odd years, I guess, but there does seem, you know, I loved it. I've demolished it over the weekend and finished it this morning. But there are kind of sticking points, even though there's lots of different tales and lots of different vistas and lots of different visions throughout the poems, and they are bookmarked in these different eras. There are similar themes that run constantly throughout your work, aren't there?
Yeah, and I think that's important not to shy away from that, because for me, the themes of certainly somebody who's been brought up and lived and worked their life in the Black Country, there are things that become familiar both by landscape and by mood or environment. I don't mean like as in a building sense, as in an identity of region. And for me, I found it interesting to see how each of those points gathers pace or changes or becomes more or less relevant as I'm getting older. I mean, I hit 60 in March, and I thoroughly enjoyed being 50. I thought that was great, but 60, I don't really start thinking about that now, because it's sort of a much more mature age, and I'm certainly not ready for becoming mature. So it's
yeah, I mean, I got that sense when I was reading it actually, and it brought to mind some things that Dave Reeves used to say to me. And I know you say a big thank you to Dave Reeves at the start of the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, beautiful man that he was. He said, you know, he always felt like he was getting more radical and more extreme the older he got.
Yeah.
And there is still that kind of sort of, I don't know, there's still a fist ready to pounce in your work, isn't there? You know?
Yeah, there's one thing that it was actually pointed out to me. It's really strange, isn't it, that you don't always notice it when you're writing it. That I can be describing something, and then suddenly there's like a counterpoint or a turning point or something that shoots it off into another direction.
That happens a lot in your work. A real sucker punch from time to time, and you quite often, and especially when in your more visionary or dreamscape poems, quite often we're pulled back to the real in quite a blunt and brusque way, you know, and that works really well.
Yeah, I think it's important that I had said to me once that my work was completely accessible, and they said we don't mean that in a derogatory sense. We mean that you use language that we can easily understand and, you know, go through. And they said, but one thing that you do is write in layers, so we can actually choose which layer or actually journey between the layers of your writing, without worrying about the language you're using. And it's only again when somebody points that out to you that you realize that those mechanisms are in there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, you've got the layers of time as it moves through the book, and then you've got the layers of a kind of imagined Black Country and imagined Wednesbury, of the child looking elsewhere and the adult looking back, but then the very real. So even there, you've got layers of time, you've got layers of space, you've got layers of imagination, all happening simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think that's because for me, it's very difficult. I like things that are non-linear, that you can actually explore a second in time by going through the layers of that second in time, rather than trying to maybe tell a story over a period, if you know what I mean. It's like an instant snapshot, but we've actually explored that snapshot very deeply, or you know, with some detail being given. that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, I mean, one of the things that I noticed quite a lot when reading it is the sort of topic and play around the ideas of nostalgia and your own personal memories, but also the kind of regional nostalgia and well, I mean, the title kind of hints at it as well, doesn't it? But you deal with that again with this multi-layered sort of aesthetic as well, because sometimes we're looking back in grief, sometimes we're looking back with rosy tinted glasses, sometimes we're looking back to know where to go forwards, but none of that is done just in the singular in your work, is it? It's always, there's always a little bit of sadness and a little bit of love and a little bit of hope and a little bit of despair, and you create this peculiar sort of, I don't know, it's like a psychic map of growing up, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, one of the poems talks about the time I spent in the factory. I could have written about how noisy it was, dirty it was, all of that sort of stuff. But the thing that stuck in my mind the most was just outside of the factory was a fantastic area of meadowland. And, you know, on a break, you could walk through this meadow in the summer, and you'd be greeted with literally hundreds of different species of butterflies living next door, absolutely next door to this big asbestos grey factory. And during the winter, you know, the foxes would come and bring their cubs in, because like the rough, tough blokes in the factory would share the meat off the sandwiches with them, and they knew that they could come, you know, and for a free meal. And it's having that sort of parallel beauty, that humanity, in what would normally be considered to be quite a hostile environment. And it's so important that the juxtaposition of having a lovely meadow next to a noisy factory is one thing, but to have the integration of the two was something very special.
Yeah,
and
I mean, it strikes me that's like such a quintessentially Black Country thing as well. Like that sort of thing could only ever happen in a place like Wednesbury.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I actually worked was just into Bilston, and it was you know, it was in manufacturing, so all of the wildlife put up with, you know, the ringing of metal and the whining of generators. So, you know, it for them to actually not be scared of that, you know, I mean, I've seen blokes climb up on ladders to get birds that have got trapped up in the girder work, you know, and they've gone and fetched them down and released them outside, and you know, all of these things that went on in a factory, you know, that is another story to them, which is a story that doesn't get told ordinarily.
Yeah,
you know, is that sort of humanity.
yeah, absolutely, and I think that's something that your work touches on quite a lot as well. And again, it, you know, it's drawn from your own experiences as well. That on one hand, you're this kind of fluffy poet who likes his music and whatnot, but you're also a stealer who's done your time at the furnace face, as it were. So you and you know, again, I mean, I think this is something where our two poetic minds come together as well. That we see this world of masculine Black Country culture that's both kind of brutal and hard and tough, but also very gentle and very poised and sort of aligned with craft and precision as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think that's still sort of rod, or that grit in the veins of industrial regions, you know, shines through. I think in many ways we're fortunate to have the weight of heavy industry in a sense that sort of binds the community, and we still have that strong sense of community, which is vital, I think, as human beings. And certainly in these times where we found isolation being forced upon us again through, you know, sort of through the COVID issues and so forth. The idea of community, I don't think has ever been more in focus, certainly in my life, than it is now. You know, and I think that's something that we have to realize, is that we might be individuals, but we're not sort of lone workers, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really lovely sentiment, and an important one, I think, that so many of us have kind of realized or have had it reconfigured for us over the last 18 months or so. So, I mean, your work moves in many different directions all at once, and we've established this kind of motif of this layering and looking forward and looking back and looking into yourself and out to your landscape, all sort of simultaneously. Do you think that is an attribute and of your dyslexia?
I think it's a wonderful gift. I wouldn't change it for anything. The really odd thing about it is that I've actually taught myself to be left-handed again, and suddenly I can, you know, draw far better than I've ever been able to draw right-handed. I draw the line literally at changing to being a left-handed guitarist. I'm just going to remain a right-handed guitarist. But one of the things that's happened since I retrained about 12 years ago, something like that, and started to find that some of the dyslexia issues I had were dropping away. Now, one thing it's proven to me is that I was dyslexic anyway. And so the switching from left to right-handedness only added to that issue. So I'm still, you know, dyslexic, but some things are making more sense to me now that I'm left-handed, believe it or not. It's a very strange thing. And I know there are a lot of people in the so-called, you know, progressive 60s and 70s were still believed as a left-hander to hold the devil's hand, you know, and that you know, in the Christian society we needed to be right-handed, you know, and it was it's all that politics that sort of you get mixed up in with education. You know, my mom was told, you know, she got to keep swapping my hand over. You know, how's he going to cope with, you know, we don't have left-handed scissors, which we didn't then. And I still can't cut in a straight line now because I've, you know, invariably used right-handed scissors. You know, it's little things like that that you realise that you're, you know, you're wired the other way around. It doesn't make much difference in that sense, as long as you're not cross-wiring, which obviously I ended up being. So yeah. So maybe a few of these ideas come from the short circuits that sort of exist in you know, somewhere deep in the synapses of my mind, you know. So and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I sort of try and move from a logical to a fantastical sort of process within each of the poems. Yeah,
I get that sense. And I think, you know, so much of this is built up in lots of ways. I mean, I'm no expert at all, but, you know, I mean, part of it's neurological, isn't it? Part of it's the sort of the way that the mind and brain starts to form patterns. And if that pattern then gets disrupted by being forced to do something that the body's not meant to do, it's going to start creating, you know, unusual patterns of sort of thought processing, I suppose, and cognitive ability. And some of that's going to be positive, like you said, and some of it's going to make things more awkward. But I think in your case, Bren, it's managed to really kind of bloom and flower into something quite impressive.
Thank you.
While we're on this subject, then tell us a little bit about Dreamwell Publishing and why you went with them for this project.
I got introduced to Mel Warder Woodend, who is Staffordshire Poet Laureate at the moment, and been made very, very welcome with their online shows and some of their publications. And it was just sort of very important for me when I found out that she ran a publishing organization, but it was specifically in design, but not exclusively to be read by people with dyslexia. And so the layout of the book is dyslexia friendly, so that people who do not suffer from or see dyslexia as an issue, people who don't have dyslexia can read the book as in the same way, but people with dyslexia, it's all like properly line spaced, and the typeface is dyslexia friendly. There's a lot of research gone into the spacing and the types of typeface that make the book easier to read. It's on off-white paper, so you haven't got the color bounce or the contrast bounce between the the dark print and the glaringly white page. And so the layout is incredibly friendly. The font size is of a certain type. Because one of the problems I get is that I can start on one line and then I end up sort of 3 lines down, and then I'm back up to the second line and whatever. So when I'm scanning across, I can mix up the lines, whereas with this format of book, that doesn't happen. And so if you're not a dyslexic, you just read the book as a book. But if you are dyslexic, it helps you through there by not having that sort of distraction of bounce and tightness of typeface.
Yeah.
And so found out Mel was doing all this good work and promoting the fact that people with dyslexia can also read books. It's one thing that I've unfortunately never been able to read a novel because of it. Because novels, I can read bits of novels, but I can't remember the page before. I can't keep those sort of concepts in my head of developing a plot. Lynn, my wife, thinks it's fantastic because I can watch endless repeats of Poirot or anything like that, and I still don't know. It's like I'm watching it for the first time. So it's sort of really good to in some ways to have that because everything's new. But yeah, I mean, going back to Dreamwell, fantastic organisation. Mel's done some fantastic titles leading up to this, and some fundraising titles as well. So please check them out. They're Stafford based, and Mel's such a lovely person.
Yeah, and does a lot of really great work for the Staffordshire sort of literature and cultural scene generally.
And she cares about your work. That's the other thing. She wants it to be your work at the end of it, but obviously it's got to fit into a particular format. And so one of the things that you end up discussing is in my particular case, the flow of poems, so that they didn't jar against each other in the various sections, that they actually flow through in a much simpler, easy read way. And when I was given the proof copies to read through, I actually managed to read through the whole book without stumbling across any of the lines, and that's so it obviously does work.
Yeah. We've just had a question in on the chat here from Josie Ann Bren, who wants to know if reading novels has been challenging in terms of kind of following the plots and whatnot.
Yeah.
How do you go about constructing your narrative as a writer in short fiction or novels or poems for that matter? Yeah,
I mean, novels are a complete no. Weirdly, I can write a play script because I can hear the voices of the different characters, and I don't lose my way in writing script because it's like I'm hearing a conversation. I think what it is with a novel is that there's so many words that to try and get over a concept or a story, a passage of story, that I can't do that. I've never been able to do it. But in shorter pieces like short stories, poetry, songwriting, and bizarrely writing plays, I seem to be able to retain those things. And I can't answer that in that
So
sense.
it must be something to do with the act of reading and the way in which it's formatted that does something.
Yes. Yeah. So I haven't got to the bottom of that yet as to why that works. And I know that's not a complete answer, but in my personal research as to, why things are as they are, I've not been able to come up with an answer to that. I used to read a lot of sort of factual books because I could bizarrely again retain factual things and understand a concept within a fact, but again going back to a story in a novel, I can't do it. So it's just about maybe the abstract way that the mind works, that it just pieces the things together incorrectly.
Yeah. I've got one more final question for you, Bren, before we ask you to give us some more poems. I guess this one's for our students, really, and for anybody else that's listening that wants to kind of forge a similar path to yours in creative arts and writing and whatnot. What's your sort of writing practice like? What are your kind of processes for getting work done and work down? And do you have any kind of top tips for a sort of long and varied career like yours has been?
I do. It's always most important, I think, to keep your own voice, because your work will have an honesty about it then. Yes, you can learn different techniques of writing and that, but make it your voice. When you're delivering your work, then it comes over as an honest, believable piece. And the other thing for me is that you will, as you get older or you go through your writing life, that voice will be open to change. And it's to accept that voice as it comes, as it naturally occurs. As for writing practices, there are days when I can literally write half a dozen new pieces, and there are weeks that go by when I don't write anything. And for me, I've found that it's important to work when the inspiration is there and not try and force it. I had a bit of a discussion with somebody once about, this so-called thing called writer's block. That I think the more you try and force writing, you probably are heading towards writer's block. If you just see it as a natural process of storytelling, which may not be a good answer if you're coming up to a deadline, because deadlines can actually be very inspirational. The thing for me is to write when you feel that you're ready to write, and you'll find that the whole process is a lot easier and a lot more fruitful. I have the luxury of that because I'm not sort of studying anything, but I think for people who are writing aside of their education, if you like, just to let it flow when it flows, and enjoy that process, because otherwise it will become a chore. And I think anybody who's been writing for any length of time will probably say the same thing, that it's not about making it something you do daily. It's something that you do when you can. I mean, I've worked a week solidly on a play just because I've got to get it done, but I also loved what I was doing, and I was just working sort of 14, 15 hours writing songs and script for an intense week of writing. And I think, as long as you know you can get it done, then write when you're feeling your most positive about writing.
Yeah, and I suppose the message there as well is that you can start to enjoy the hard work of it as well, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to go through certain processes almost to train the mind into being able to channel, if you like, your ideas and your concepts when they naturally occur. And I think it's having that sort of inbuilt training to do that.
Too right. Lovely. Well, this feels like a nice point to get some more poems from you then, Brendan.
Yeah.
Let's have another 5 or so minutes of a few more poems.
Just give me the countdown, Rob.
Beautiful collection, 70s Child and Other Fashion Trends, available now.
And yeah, it is available on Amazon, through Dreamwell, and through me at brendanhawthorne.org. You can message me through the website. So this one is about the changing landscape, and it's called Lost Youth. It was just there where we turned left, or was it right? When we went round the traffic island for the 3rd time, the one with the cones that have now become a landmark in their own right, a memorial to temporary permanence. Remember when I said that's where it was? The pub I bought my first pint in when I was 16. The acne and the bum fluff gave me away, but they still served me, even if I did vomit off the top step of the lounge where the drinks were dearer. Must be about where that oil drum is, next to the poppy by the wall and the burned out scooter. Yes, it's just there. The pool table was where that puddle is now. I remember the boss stuff that nearly took the head off the landlord as the Red Bull cannoned off the middle pocket with a screwed spin that raised it above the bulk and ricocheted off the serving hatch. All the landlord had wanted to know was if we were okay for drinks. He went as pale as his apron. But how we laughed. We got wasted on this building site at 12 pence a pint and 10 pence on the cush. The jukebox was always playing Dixie. I think it was double 4 time. We were all in dire straits then, and now it's gone. But that's where it was, just there, where we turned right. Or was it left? And the next one I'm going to do is a poem. My granddad was a glassblower, and he was a great guy. Infinite patience with me, and this is for him. This is for Sam. There was a bit of a trend in the 60s and the 70s when the glass blowers and the end of day glass, they used to make ornaments for people's shelves, and so the orders used to go in, and obviously when they'd cooled down sufficiently, my granddad had stuff his overcoat pocket with all the end of day glass that he'd made and give them out to the neighbours. This is called Glass Swans. You'd see them, graduated glass swans looking like ducks in a row, paddling in clear glass across white lead gloss paint in the windows of terrace front bays. Up and down the street they'd migrate, big uns, little uns, all with a cool, curved, pinched bill head and swept with a flourish that only skill can promote in a single flick. At the tamped down ashtray space between bulbous wings, the base was nipped and sheared and stretched into a majestic arch, fine and fragile. They all wanted them. Neighbours clamoured for end-of-day artistry, treasures to ornament the sparse shelf that always faced out to passers-by, never into the room, for the occupants to admire or look over. On a rainy day, it was something to trap the sun. In the summer, from factory darkness, the swans reminded of us those who'd sweated and toiled, wore the grime on their backs, manufacturing grace and beauty from the noise and the dust and the heat from hell. Things that only a gift shop could truly afford. When the shift ended, the spoils were shared simply with a homeward journey, knock on the door, a reach into an overcoat, another swan produced. This one for the mantle, Mrs. Turley. Now it'll look good in the bay, facing out towards them over the road. And I'm just going to do two more. Postcards, great way of writing. And this is the postcard said, I don't have room to say much here other than I'd like to say more than if I had the space, I would. And then I could tell you about the caravan park and the potholes in the dark and the weather that remains consistently poor. And the man in the shop who says he knows you from when you lived on the estate. He mentioned something about a blue Lambretta and a Who ticket. I told him I'd remind you, but as space to write is limited, I won't. So just to say the journey was okay, but the destination isn't worth it, and that we are making the best of it. Sister Jodie's sunburn is only 2nd degree, just like her, eh? When she moves, it's like shaking a snow dome. Uncle Charlie will be in a cast for 6 weeks following his fall, attempting a desperate toilet run in the middle of the night. That's how we got to know about the pothole. On the positive side, we think the stain will come out of his beige holiday slacks. Colin's rash will need time and an explanation. Jeannie can't remember where she left her new stilettos after a night at the social club, but the owner gives her a wink every time he walks past, so I think he knows something. And the doctor says the sting I got on the first night will go down once the antibiotics kick in. The waiting room at the surgery was nice, though. It had your lounge wallpaper. Strange that, really decorative, but I can't say much for the receptionist. Sorry this is brief, not much to report on really, so see you next week upon our return. And for now, just to say, wish you were here, Cousin Jim. And just to finish on, 70s Child, which is obviously where this book's rooted. 70s Child saw film of rocket ships landing on the moon, heard Concorde beating sound overhead with its slender gooseneck profile, migrating across terraced rooftops and tower blocks. 70s Child listened to Slade on the 8-track, could easily recognise a Ford Cortina Mark III in GLX electric blue from the end of the street, and car crime was depicted with a wire coat hanger aerial. 70s Child could run for the bus in patch pocket high waist Oxford bags, wearing platform sole shoes on pinched feet and tank tops over penny round picture shirts. 70s Child was fed on beef dripping, meat and 2 veg main courses and suet dumpling desserts, and saw the world through Vesta packet meals by just adding water and simmering for 20 minutes. 70s Child took risks on no-break wrecks, ate in fast food holics and burger joints, had conversation other than game boxes and mobile phones, and didn't know what a designer label meant. 70s Child could ride on free-flowing motorways and funked-up wide handlebar chopper bikes before going through a string of world crises, van bomb protests and other boom bust projects. 70s Child survived power cuts, pay cuts and Muhammad Ali uppercuts and pogoed into punk with a trendy leftover feather cut, then waved flags in time to God Save the Queen and witnessed democracy from the end of a dole queue. 70s Child is now sipping a pretentious little Chardonnay, a cappuccino from a refurbished dockside cafe, and contemplates the blameless society over an expanding waistline and wonders where the bloody hell it all went wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again, Brendan Hawthorne, everyone.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thanks very much, Brendan. And thanks once again, everybody, for tuning in. I'm just going to hand you back over to Claire to close the event. But before I do that, huge thanks to Bren, who's been a dear friend of mine for a while now and a really good friend to the University of Wolverhampton, our creative and professional writing team, and the School of Humanities generally. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Brendan, it's been a real pleasure having you with us, and just a real treat to hear your poems. Loved that last one. Thank you so much. Please do come again.
Will do.
I hope you all enjoyed that at home. Our next ArtsFest Online event is tomorrow, Tuesday the 30th of November at 6:30 p.m. and it's an online panel discussion about the lived experience of family planning for women living with inflammatory bowel disease. The event is an opportunity to hear from the team involved and you will see some of the compelling artwork made by selected artists. As always, you can book for free through Eventbrite. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.